You're listening to the Over 50 Entrepreneur, the podcast that's dedicated to the business builders who are only getting started when most are winding down. This is the place to discover how to create more freedom from your business while growing the value of your business. Now here's your host, Rick Hadrava.
Hey guys, this is Rick Hadrava, and you are listening to another episode of the Over 50 Entrepreneur Podcast. For those of you that might be listening via YouTube, you'll notice that we try to do some things different. And look, I just came up on the first year of podcasting, and one of the questions I get all the time is, what is this podcasting thing? How do you do it? What did you do? Why do you do it? And so I grabbed my buddy, Steve Gordon. He's the guy that actually produces the podcast for us. From Unstoppable CEO. He has his own podcast. It's a great one. But he was the first guy we had a conversation with when we launched our podcast. And so I thought it'd be great if we let Steve kind of sit with us, ask some questions, and share kind of what we've taken away in the first year of the Over 50 Entrepreneur Podcast. So Steve, man, I know between you and me, we're a couple quick starts, so this should not be all that difficult.
No, Rick, hey, thanks for having me back. And I want to point out that I'm not qualified to be here because I'm not 50 yet, but I'm getting close. I'm within sight. So, hey, this is, I think, a great time to celebrate because I don't know if you know this, but the average podcast, according to Apple, the average podcast in iTunes has a grand total of 6 episodes. And you're recording and publishing this one, which means you're at 52. So congratulations. Not many people actually have the kind of stick-to-itiveness to make it this long. And I think that's something to be celebrated because you've interviewed some great people. You've shared some really amazing insights and wisdom from folks from Tony Horton to Bob Berg to Mike Michalowicz, all kinds of folks. And I think it's been really impactful. So congratulations on a great year.
Thank you. Well, you hit on it. I mean, I've had great guests, both, in my local market and around the region and throughout the country. And that's been fun to hear their stories and be able to share their stories and highlight what they do week in and week out is rewarding, not only in the way I do business and what I do, but also just being able to share that message with them. So and by the way, all the credit goes to you and the team because you guys really have made this easy for me to do. I just get to talk, which has never been hard for me.
Well, thanks for that. But really, for anybody that does this, showing up is the hardest part. The technical stuff, it's some work, but having the courage to show up, to put yourself out in public like this, requires some courage and for anybody that does it. So I'm curious, I get to turn the tables on you today. And so what a lot of people don't hear through your other episodes when you're interviewing another expert is, what is it that you do? How do you help people? And I know because we've worked together behind the scenes, but I know you've got a wealth management practice. You've got the Epic Business Advisory. You've created this really amazing process called the Freedom Formula for helping business owners really understand what they need to be working on to increase the value of their business. And you run masterminds that are just getting rave reviews. So I'd love for you to just take a moment here and just share with us all really what you do and what your expertise is beyond the podcast.
Well, I appreciate that. And, for those that maybe don't know, for 26 plus years, I was in the wealth management business, still in the wealth management business, but I have an RIA firm with my partner, and she actually runs the portfolio management operations. We've got Tom, Valerie is my partner. Tom is our operations, and they really do the heavy lifting on a day-to-day basis. I do get to spend time with clients there and love it. But I also, to take it back a little bit, about 6 years ago, maybe a little longer, I started to work with business owners on non-financial issues. And it really came out of an opportunity to help somebody with a problem. And initially, I didn't have the capabilities. But over time, I went out and got my exit planning designation. I was part of different programs. I was constantly trying to get into businesses, figuring out where they're getting stuck. And so when we created our own RIA firm, our registered investment advisory firm, we also launched Epic Business Advisory as a non-financial business, and has nothing to do with our wealth management business. And it was simply to work with business owners to bring it all together. We talk about the fact that as business owners, we all have the same kind of vision in mind. We may not articulate it all the time, but the reality is someday we're going to transition this business to key employees or family members. Maybe we're going to sell the business. Maybe we just want to run it forever as a CEO, but get ourselves out of that business more. And what I've been able to realize is there are ways to bring community together. There's ways to kind of get business owners to step back and work, the proverbial work on the business instead of in the business. And I find that there's a huge demand for that kind of offering out there. And what's funny is I work with a lot of independent financial advisors today with their business owner clients. We're not trying to compete. We're trying to add some extra value. And so it's been great. We started out just doing one-on-one coaching that evolved into workshops. And before COVID, we were doing 3 workshops a month. And then COVID hit. And out of that, I was just looking for a way, how do I keep all these people connected, Steve, was actually the case. And we started doing the Zoom calls. I got to know Zoom right away. And that evolved into what we have affectionately called the Freedom Series calls. And we've been able to bring good guests together, good content together, and a community of business owners where they get to connect, they get to hear, they get to chime in and share what they're dealing with or some suggestions. And it's just evolved. We also do the mastermind groups like you talked about. It's probably been the fastest growing. We've been able to do a 13-week immersion into how to drive value, how to connect with other business owners. And it's gotten, like you said, it's gotten great reviews, great feedback. And it's really what we're focused on. I would say the focus of Epic Business Advisory is one-on-one and masterminds with the goal of helping business owners get unstuck, if you will.
Yeah, I love it. So, full disclosure, I had a little bit of behind the scenes as you created the Freedom Formula. And I saw the thinking that you put into that. Can you give us just a quick little overview of why you created it and the role that it serves?
Sure. Well, the reality is we all bring this different experiences, different expertise, just different things in life. And I was sitting there, you and I were talking about it, to be honest, hey, you need to take this information you're sharing with me and you need to make it into something. And I always joke, I was actually out having dinner with my wife and they had this tablecloth that was made of butcher paper or whatever, and they had crayons. And I just started doodling, right? Because it's hard for me to just sit still, if you can imagine. And it just started coming to me. It's like, here's a fun way to look at your business and go step by step through some things that may or may not be obvious, and they don't capture everything. But I think as you start to focus on those, they become a core component of how you're looking at your business. And, it's not necessarily step 1, step 2, step 3, but it's identifying maybe where you need to spend some time and being able to go around the wheel and just continue to make improvements in some systematic way. And so we created it. We've had fun with it, and we hope to continue to do that.
Well, I know it's helped a lot of people, particularly as you deliver that through the mastermind. So let's talk a little bit about your experience with the podcast, because here we are at the 1-year anniversary of it. And walk us through kind of where you were when you started the podcast, and why you wanted to start it in the first place. and kind of walk us through that journey of what's happened.
Wow. That would be the way I'd start out. So, I had this idea coming up on 50, and I thought, what's something that would be uncomfortable for me so I could grow? I joke with people, I'm really good with numbers. The English language can really complex me at times. But I thought it would be interesting to get to hear the story of other entrepreneurs, right? Because let's be honest, they are the problem solvers in the world. They do wonderful things. They deal with challenges, and to be able to hear from some of these people, right, and really get them to share their stories, I just thought I could learn from them. Maybe they could inspire other people, and it would be interesting. The challenge became for me is how to do it, right? And I remember reaching out to you, Steve, and going, Steve, I have this idea. How do I do it? And you kind of stared at me and said, it's a great idea, but why do you want to do all the production? And as I told you, I was getting up at 4 a.m. trying to learn, like, how do you download this into Adobe? And then what do you got to edit it? And my mind just started to go numb. And you really stepped in there. But the essence of it was simply no expectation other than I thought it would be a great idea to hear from entrepreneurs out there and to share their stories.
Yeah, and I think that's really critical for anybody that's looking at a podcast or any type of media. You and I talk a lot about using media as a means of growing your business and really kind of becoming a media first company. But I always feel like the first way to begin is just to have a vision for what you want to communicate. And that's really where you started. You had this idea in your head that, there are people out there that are over 50 that are going to be starting businesses or have businesses and are going to want to get them in position to do something with them. And they've got stories to tell. And you want to go talk to those people. And I think that's a great place to start. So you mentioned some of the complexity. Like, you were getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning. And I remember that conversation we had, and you told me you're getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning trying to learn, I think it was Adobe Audition. And I'm like, oh my goodness, that is admirable, certainly. But last I checked, you were not trying to change careers and become an audio engineer, right?
Absolutely. Just, I wouldn't be any good at it, Steve. And when you kind of brought the solution, we talk about, so if you talk about business owners, right? The good entrepreneurs always find a problem and then come up with a solution. And that's what you did for me, is you're like, look, you go out and do these interviews. They're great, and we'll help you. And you don't have to do anything else. And I'll be honest, at that moment, I felt a weight off my shoulders because it was something I needed to do, but I didn't know how to get to the end of the line with it. And, that's just like any great entrepreneur. There's a lot of collaboration that goes on. And the podcast has grown into this idea with a vision. It's built on itself. And it's been a lot of fun.
So let's talk about the growth of it, because I'll never forget. So full disclosure, my company produces this podcast for you and with you. And I'll never forget, I got the email notification when you booked your first big guest. And I looked at it and I thought, well, that can't be right. Because here we are, we haven't launched the podcast, and going into it, it's not as though you had 100,000 people who were following you on LinkedIn or on, an email list or something like that. And in comes this confirmation of an appointment with Tony Horton. And for those of you listening who don't know who Tony Horton is, wake up at about 7 o'clock on a Saturday morning and turn on virtually any channel, and you'll see one of his infomercials for one of his fitness products, probably P90X, because they've been on for the last 20 years. And so Tony's kind of a big deal in the world of business, and certainly in the business of fitness. And remind me again, how did that come about? How did you get him on because you didn't even have a podcast at that point. It didn't exist.
Well, so one of the exercises that you had me do was hey, let's start out with who our target 100 would be, right? Because it's great to have this idea for a podcast. But if you don't have the people lined up that you're going to interview, and so you took me through this exercise, and I took it a step further, and I said, what if I had no constraints on who the guest would be? What if I got uncomfortable and went out there and put myself out there? And I started writing down that, and at the top of my list was Tony Horton. And by the way, whether it's been Tony or Jordan Harbinger or Bob Berg, Andrea Waltz, the list goes on, they are all wonderful people. And that's the thing that really struck me. But what I did is I simply then started researching. How do I find their email address? How do I, find a phone number? And I just sent, in some cases, I direct messaged on LinkedIn and said, look, I'm doing this podcast. It's called The Over 50 Entrepreneur. We want to share stories and inspire. And that was it. And I have to tell you, these big names, national names that you would think would go no, all stepped up. And they said, absolutely. Matter of fact, Jordan Harbinger was the only one that asked, how many episodes have you done? How many listeners do you have? And I was honest with him, and he replied, when you get to a certain number, then circle back to me. And, he eventually came around and was willing to do it, but Tony was so gracious. All these people were so gracious, but it's that simple ask. And, it's one of the things with the freedom formula that I talk about a lot is unconstrained vision. Like, yes, it was very scary to put myself out here. Nobody had ever heard me on a podcast. And I worried about what my friends would say. I worried about what my community would say. And I got to be honest with you, some people I haven't heard from, and I'm sure some people are critical of it. But the reality is the people that I get that are responsive to me all the time, I heard this person, and boy, that really is what I needed to hear. Or I heard so-and-so talk about this one concept, and it's just helped my business. And, those things, those are the unintended benefits to me of doing something like a podcast.
Well, and so it's interesting when that happens. So, it's one thing to do it altruistically so that you can impart some wisdom or bring a guest that imparts some wisdom onto someone that you may or may not know. And that's great. It makes you feel good. We launched an episode this week, and you emailed me about this particular guest, and I had about 5 other people email me about how great it was. Makes me feel good. But beyond that, from a business perspective, and I want to talk a little bit about how this has impacted your business. But from a business perspective, what you're really doing there is you're showing up to that person and saying, hey, yes, you're getting a lot from this guest, but you know what? I'm the one that is bringing you all of these wise people. And you're not saying it overtly. You're letting your actions say that. So every time you show up and you've got a Tony Horton or a Bob Berg or a John Jantz, or all these people that you've been able to get on who are brilliant, and then share that with your network goes, oh, wait, whoa, what? How's Rick getting in touch with all these people? He must be a real, big deal. So, some of that accrues back to you. So there's a business purpose in doing it aside from just altruistically wanting to help people.
Well, Steve, and I'll circle back to that a different way. I really do focus on our local business owners, and I've had Stan Clark from Eskimo Joe's, which is a really famous restaurant, and actually it's broader than just Eskimo Joe's in what he does. And he came to the studios. He actually showed up, and I'd never met Stan before directly. I had been around. I knew him. I knew his story. But Sean Copeland, Nathaniel Harding, just a number of guests locally that also are just incredible people. Everybody I've interviewed has had some kind of real value out there to share. But to your point, what it has done is it's given some credibility to then circle back with these folks. And so we talk about the transition. So we started doing the Freedom Series calls as a way to bring this community together. It was an easy an easy ask, both from, hey, do you want to participate in this call, from a standpoint of getting the same speakers that have been on the podcast to come give their time to the community, but on the other side also to invite the community of all these business owners, and bring that all together. To your point is, we've been able to do that and connect, and then it's led to business opportunities for Epic Business Advisory along the way as well.
Well, so let's talk about those Freedom Series calls so that folks who maybe aren't familiar with them know what you did there. When we went into the COVID lockdowns in March of 2020, you sort of jumped into action and said, you know what, I need to bring together everybody, all the business owners that are in my network that I have connection with. And this is beyond just sending the podcast out. So you arranged to do a Zoom meeting, and I think you were doing them weekly at the beginning. Is that right? Because everybody in the country was, and in the world, frankly, was really kind of trying to wrap our arms and our minds around what was going to be. And so you bring all of these people together, but because you had connected with these experts from the business world, you were able to go and invite them back in, and they came and graciously shared their time and their expertise with the small group of people on these calls. So what would you have, 20 or 30 or 40 people from the local community?
Right.
Now, to me, this is an astonishing thing. That's why I want to really put a point on it for folks. Imagine if you had these relationships with the Bob Bergs of the world and with the John Jances and the Tony Hortons, and you were able to reach out to them and say, hey, we're going through a crisis, and I've got my flock here, my local network that I'm trying to help. Will you please come in and share your wisdom with them? And that had to be really impactful for those business owners.
Well, and I'll take it, let me put a little more flavor around it. So imagine going into March and you have 3 booked solid workshops monthly throughout the year. You've got a number of one-on-one coaching that you were doing, and all of a sudden, boom, it comes to a stop, right? And I'll be honest with you, the Freedom Series call evolved out of a necessity to keep that community together. And so I just did this first Zoom call, and I think you were part of that very first one. And then I just started thinking, how can I continue to bring value, keep people connected so that they didn't, we talk about fight and flight, and then there's the frozen. And a lot of business owners just froze up during this thing. And so I went back to those groups, and what I did was simple, is I said, look, I'm doing this. I'm not charging for it. I'm not making a dime. Would you come spend some time? And you know what? I'm willing to make a donation. I don't have a big budget for it, but I'm willing to make a donation to a charity of your choice as a thank you for an hour of your time. And I got to tell you, almost all of them said, oh, don't worry about that. We'll come do it. And matter of fact, I said, well, great. Do you think you could send me some autographed books? Because we love to give things away. And so, all this thing it happened, and these guys stepped up and did incredible. But, Steve, we started with about 35 in the database for the Freedom Series call, real small, right? Again, it was that group, and it's grown to well over 150 business owners in that database since March of this year. So I really, it's a funny thing about entrepreneurism in general is, it's that, I don't like the word pivot. I think everybody's using that word, but it's going where it's taking you, understanding, what the mission is that you're trying to do. And in my case, it's how can I be valuable to business owners, right? And
Yep. Well, and I think that's really what we're all trying to do in business, because that's where all the results come from. And you're right, pivot is overused, but you're adapting along the way. And the podcast has allowed you to build relationships that have, and I think frankly opened up your capabilities to be able to do something, like hold a Zoom call like that and sort of command that group, which might have been difficult before. So I think it's impacted in a lot of ways. So you mentioned the transition from in-person workshops. You had in-person workshops that were filled with business owners that all went away. And, within really a fairly short amount of time, you pivoted and launched a virtual version of that, and turned it into sort of a 12-week program that you conducted remotely with people. And you've concluded that very first group. You sold out the first group, if I recall correctly, within a matter of days. I remember we sent the first email out, and you emailed me back. In fact, I'm so particularly proud of this that I use a screenshot of that email in one of the presentations that we give, because you were in a tough spot, and because you had used this podcast to build relationship kind of at a distance with the people in your network and warm them up, you had their attention, and you were able to say, look, this is a really difficult time. I've invented a new way to create value. I've got this new virtual workshop that I think is going to be really great for people. And because people were paying attention to you, it was easy for you to make that transition. And so it's been cool to watch. But I'd love for you to talk a little bit about the mastermind. And I mean, the way to me all these things tie together is the podcast is sort of the foundation. It's this media platform that has allowed you to really touch your market in a unique way, but it's also given you the confidence to be able to do something like a virtual mastermind and to execute on that. So tell us a little bit about that process. And I'd love to hear what you're seeing as the results for the people who've gone through that mastermind, what they're accomplishing.
I've been humbled by the results. And really what we did is we said, look, let's take the content that we might share throughout a year and let's consolidate it. And Steve, we started out at 12 weeks, but actually what ended up happening, I took it to 13 weeks because I just saw that there was a need for an extra week in there, which is fine. But we opened up the portal. We opened up to videos and to exercises for all the participants. So each week they have a little bit of homework on a topic, on a value driver type topic that we're talking about. But what we did is we matched them up with others that they did not know. And we asked them to jump on a call during the week to talk about that topic, to talk about their business. And then what we did is just once a week, we came together, we spent an hour, and we talked about the topic, we talked about their business, and just whatever we needed. But what we tried to do is always have something that was executable, right? Because we like to use scorecards, and it's funny. I've sat through so many workshops and read so many books over the years, and the thing that, they're great theories and everything, but watching them be put into action to actually get results is what's important. And what's great for me is I like to give brand promises. I'm like, look, if we're not right for everybody, I know that. Like, you have to be open to it. It has to fit what you need from it. And if it's not, then we don't want to take advantage of you. But for those that were participating, the interaction with the other people in the mastermind, the results that they started to see, the way it changed the way they were looking at their business. And this is the type of feedback that was coming back to me. It was great. We recorded every episode. We'd send it out so they could re-listen to that hour that we spent together. And now what we've got is some of those people have referred other people for our next mastermind, and we're filling that up quickly, and we just continue. And so it's great. It's humbling. I learn as much as they do. And I think that's probably really where I'm focused more with Epic Business Advisory. Again, we do one-on-one. That's been transitioned to virtual as well in this environment, at least for the time being. But the masterminds really give us an opportunity to leverage a whole lot of people's expertise and experience all together.
And I mean, I think if you think back to where you were a year ago when you were up at 4 a.m. trying to start the podcast, And then look at what has transpired. I think I don't know what you would say, but it seems like it's positioned you really well to weather the storm that we're all finding ourselves in.
Well, listen, I'm like everybody else. I have concern. There's so much noise out there, so much negativity, but I got to be honest with you. I'm so excited about the future because I know, I go back to this. I have a belief that the entrepreneurs are the problem solvers. They are the leadership. They put people to work. And if we can support them, right? If we can give them a community, if we can bring our experience and our expertise, and sometimes, Steve, that's me connecting somebody with somebody else, has nothing to do with me. But if we can build a platform to help support and promote entrepreneurism and business owners, and then you know what? If they're thinking about selling or thinking about transitioning, then there's work that we obviously can do with them. But it gets me excited. I'm more excited today about where we're going to be a year from now, maybe than what's happened in this past year with all the success that we've had.
Well, that's awesome. I know there will be a lot of changes as you go through the year, inevitably. Rick, I want to, you probably aren't comfortable doing this, but I want to put in a plug for the mastermind. So folks, if you own a business and you're listening to this, I don't know what point you're listening to this, but if you are concerned about what your business might be worth when you go to sell it, if you're beginning to think about those sorts of things, then you probably ought to get a hold of Rick. And if you are in a place where you want more freedom in your business, more freedom of time, more financial freedom, freedom of relationship, then you probably ought to get a hold of Rick. And you ought to investigate what he's doing, because the investment is really, I keep telling him he needs to raise his prices, but the investment is very reasonable for the amount of insight and value that you're going to get out of it. And so, Rick, is it okay if I give out your email address?
Absolutely. I'm happy to take questions from the audience, or, get on a phone call, whatever. So please go ahead and share that.
Yeah. So, go to epicsbiz.com. That's EPIC, the letter S, and then BIZ.com. And go check out the website. You'll find a whole lot more in terms of podcast episodes. You'll find the interviews that we've talked about with Tony Horton and Bob Berg and John Jantz and all of the amazing guests that he's had. So go do that. And on the website, you'll find a presentation that Rick has done, a video that explains the Freedom Formula and how to use that to really to do what it says, to create. It is a formula to create freedom in your business, and it works. And so you can find that there, whether you ever engage with Rick or not. Go find and take advantage of those things. But if you want to reach Rick directly, hit him up at rick@epicsbiz.com and put him on the spot. Ask him a question. He's a pretty friendly guy, as you can imagine.
Well, Steve, I appreciate it. And rick@epicsbiz.com. I'd love to hear from anybody. And Steve, I just want to thank you and the team for all the help and support this last year. And like I told you, I leaned on you a lot. It's been fun, and I appreciate our listeners. That I get emails and text messages all the time. I had somebody tell me the other day, we listen to your podcast when we're driving out to the lake on the weekends, and man, we just really enjoy it. And that's great too. We love to have fun. Hey, life is short. Let's have fun. Let's tell the stories. And so I just really appreciate everybody that supported us along this journey this last year.
Absolutely. Well, hey, Rick, thanks for letting me turn the tables on you. This has been fun, and I'll turn the reins back over to you for the next episode.
Okay. Well, thank you much. And I would tell our guests, hey, again, any podcast, this one included, check us out at epicsbiz.com/podcast. That's epicsbiz.com/podcast. Email me. We'd love to hear from you. And until next time, like we like to always say, remember, we're only getting started.
The Over 50 Entrepreneur Podcast is sponsored by Epic Business Advisory, where we help entrepreneurs escape the owner's trap. Build businesses that can succeed without you, allowing you the opportunity to realize more freedom, think bigger, and pursue next-level goals. Download our freedom formula at epicsbiz.com/formula. And remember, we're only getting started.